Okay, let's close our eyes for a moment. Let's not forget. Okay, lesson 32. You received a lot of text. Let's focus on the practical aspects. We'll continue reading from the Philosophy of the Kleshas, Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Chapter 2, Sutra 3. The lack of awareness of reality, the sense of egoism or I amness, attractions and repulsions towards objects, and the strong desire for life are the great afflictions or causes of all miseries in life. What is Patanjali doing here? He's reducing all our misery to only 5 issues. Ignorance, you know what it means, ignorance? Not knowing. It comes from the Latin word gnosos. Gnosos is knowing. Ignosos is not knowing. Ignorance. Out of ignorance comes egoism. Out of egoism comes attachment. Out of attachment comes, it's called repulsion in the sutra, we call it hatred or anger. And the last one is fear. Sutra called fear of death, or the strong desire for life. Fear of death. So you have all our suffering and misery reduced here to 5 issues, but those 5 issues can be reduced to 1. And that is the first one, ignorance. We are born ignorant. And while we grow up in ignorance, we lose ourselves in increasing misery with egoism, attachment, hatred or anger, and finally the final station is fear. And fear is the primal instinct that determines all our lives without us realizing it, of course, because we are in a condition of ignorance. But it determines the way you think, it determines the way you act and react, it determines all the decisions that you make, very often that you don't make. It's basically a condition in which we are paralyzed and in a tamas condition. It is the condition that most people are in fact in. A human being instinctively wants to be safe. That is natural because that is how not only human beings but animals too, how we survive, how our species survive. We started living like animals as hunter-gatherers to increase stability, safety, security. We then settled down and we started growing food that so we would have food supply all year round. And when we settled down and our settlements were destroyed by the weather, by other people, by animals, we started building walls. And those walls became bigger and thicker. Those houses became stronger, etc. All because of our instinct to be safe, secure, stable. And yet we are surrounded with all this safety and stability, all the structures that we have put into place throughout hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. Fear does not disappear. So we have a huge industry that sells you safety and security in the form of insurances. Now in Korea, the insurance industry has only started to boom in recent years, but in Holland, in all European countries, many insurances are compulsory. And on top of that, we take out even more insurances. We take out insurance for fire, for weather damage, for water leaking, for causing damage to other people's property, like a liability insurance. You have an insurance on your bicycle, on your pet. Insurance on your car is compulsory. There's no end to it. It's no surprise that the insurance industry is huge, like the medical, the pharmaceutical industry, the banking industry, huge, all based on our instinctive fear. We have to acknowledge that. We have to see how fear is keeping us from doing things in life that are actually crucial in terms of how we grow, how we evolve, how we eventually determine our own destiny. Most people subconsciously, unknowingly, instinctively choose to stay in their comfort zone, in their safety bubble. That is nice, that is comfortable, but you're not going anywhere, literally and figuratively. You're not going anywhere. You're not evolving, you're not growing, you're not developing. As a yogi, as a yoga practitioner, even if you do not study this subject, in a very natural way, you start challenging your fears. Simply because fear is located in Muladhara Chakra. The center of gravity of most people's consciousness is below the diaphragm. So we're stuck. We're stuck in fear. But you are doing something special that makes energy rise above the diaphragm. And the opposite quality of fear is courage. And courage is located in the crown chakra. So no surprise that in many scriptures a yogi is referred to as a warrior. Because it literally gives you the strength and the courage of a warrior. Not with a sword or a gun, but with consciousness as a weapon. Your alertness, your consciousness is your weapon. Your intellect, intelligence is your weapon. Now it's a little bit strange that already at the beginning of page 1, the story starts with a bully sergeant in the army. The reason that this bully sergeant is there is because we need to deal with fear, and that is in fact the job of the bully sergeant. There are many movies about the army, and there are many movies that have the same kind of pattern, the same kind of storyline. There's an army base, there is the sergeant, the drill sergeant, then a bus load of new recruits is dropped off at the army base. Young guys, all with a big mouth, full of brawn, that have to be turned into warriors. A big mouth is not enough to win a war. In fact, we know that people with the biggest mouths are usually the people who run away first when there is fear, when there is a scary situation. So the big mouth is only posturing. A real drill sergeant understands the importance of his job, because what you need is soldiers who are able to overcome their fear when the bullets fly and the bombs drop, and left and right your comrades are dropping dead, dying. Because fear, those kind of situations, trigger an instinct in a human being that is uncontrollable. And when the soldiers run away, triggered by fear, you lose the battle. So the best soldiers are those that stay calm and controlled in the most frantic, scary, noisy situations. So the young guys have their hair shaved, they have to hand over all their personal belongings, everything that they identify with, and all get the same clothes. And then they have to go through training. They have to do the obstacle course. They have to do all kinds of scary things. And when they freeze in fear, the bully sergeant does not use love and understanding to stimulate the soldiers to do better or to overcome their fear. He does something very interesting. Fear is the last station. What the bully sergeant does, that is why we call him a bully sergeant, he goes back to the step before fear. He pisses you off, he insults you, he diminishes you, calling you a pussy and a wimp, and yeah, if you can't do that, you better go home and wash the dishes, or he humiliates you. Why? Why would he do that? He is supposed to be their teacher. He's supposed to be their mentor. This is what happens, and you will recognize this in your own life. When you are very scared of something, and you're paralyzed and you can't do it, even though you try to rationalize it, and you try to motivate yourself to overcome your fear and to do it anyway, you just can't. Then somebody starts laughing at you and ridiculing you and making you feel small and humiliated. What happens? You explode in anger, rage. That becomes stronger than the fear. And you say, what? What the hell are you talking about? Me? Coward? Ha! I'll show you something. And you do the thing that you were not able to do. What paralyzed you in fear. That is what the bully sergeant is doing. He's trying to take away an obstacle that allows you to rise above your fear so you can do things that otherwise would be impossible. On the surface, the bully sergeant seems to be a really bad person. And there are some bad bully sergeants, don't get me wrong. Because if they start to enjoy humiliating people, then it becomes abuse, then it becomes masochistic. But a mature bully sergeant with a heart who has seen war themselves, all they want is you to come back from the battlefield. All they want from you is not to die next time you are called to war. So he uses his insights, trigger anger in the recruit to overcome their fear. Another thing that you always see invariably in those movies is first there is the hatred. And the recruits first hate their sergeant because the sergeant was a bully, humiliated them. But after months of training, and the guys receiving their green beret, their special forces or marine distinction, the recruits, whose energy was all over the place, have now become men. They realize that the sergeant has brought out qualities in them they didn't possess before. And then you go back from hatred to attachment. The scene that you see in the movies is that they end up in a bar and they slap each other on the shoulders, good old buddies. And the bully sergeant that they hated so much, they now appreciate so much. They love so much. Because they realize what he did. They realize he made real men out of those boys, real warriors out of those boys. Attachment in itself is also not the goal. So the next step is that the bully sergeant who humiliated you does the opposite. To free the recruit from the bully sergeant, from the attachment, he overloads them with compliments, with appreciation, which then makes you free. And the next step is, of course, going back to ignorance. This is a process you go through in life many times, because you always end up in fear again. This is not a static process that you solve once you have gone through the process once, but the first time you start to understand the dynamic, and you start to understand that fear does not have to be the end of everything. So after that first time, you learn to play with it yourself. And you will see there are many times in your life that you will be able to overcome fear and bring it back step by step, but that it will happen again in the next situation, in a new challenge. Challenges are challenges because we feel we're not able to overcome whatever challenge is in front of us. And the biggest ingredient is always fear. So the bully sergeant is inside you. It is you yourself who have to play the bully sergeant when confronted with fear. If not, I can do it for you. No, just kidding. I don't like bullying people at all. I'm too nice for that, I think. But yeah, but just that you understand how it works. That's why actually the story starts with the bully sergeant here. It's a very nice, practical example of how human psychology works. Now, ignorance wisdom is not something that you can learn from a book. Insight, wisdom, vision, intuition, these are all forms of higher consciousness that allow very deep insights. But you don't obtain those qualities by having many diplomas from education institutes. So even though we have had education, kindergarten, elementary school, middle school, high school, some people go on to university, that does not mean that you're not ignorant. Because ignorant here has nothing to do with theoretical knowledge that you gain from school. The solution of ignorance, or the end of ignorance, starts when the consciousness in the crown chakra opens up. And that is a potential all people have. Even people who have no education, who are not able to read or write, can be very wise, intuitive. So ignorance does not mean stupid or dumb. In the Dutch translation of the Hatha Yoga of the Patanjali Sutras, the word that was used in Sanskrit, avidya, was translated as ignorance. What was it? Ignorance of the reality. It's somewhere in the text. Lack of awareness of reality. The original text in English says avidya. A lack of awareness of reality. Lack of awareness of reality has nothing to do with a lot of theoretical knowledge. The reality is your real self with a capital S. The reality is your ability to see the law of cause and effect at work. The reality with a capital R is beyond what you are conditioned to think. And that is a quality located in the crown chakra. So like with everything else that we discuss in yoga, ignorance is a common characteristic of all human beings. Me included, you included. As a result of your yoga practice, ignorance more and more diminishes. You start more and more to see the reality. But it is a long process that takes years. I remember, if I look back to the first 5-10 years of my yoga practice, every day I was filled with wonder. Every day I was filled with ecstasy. Because on a daily basis I developed insights. I had epiphanies. And I thought, wow. And every time you think that you understand everything, you feel so good about these new insights, your increasing consciousness. You think you understand everything. But the next realization is that you don't know anything at all, that you still know nothing. That is not in a negative or pessimistic way. It is in the same feeling of ecstasy and being filled with wonder. Because you have made the step and you have made the connection. And you know that for the rest it's just a matter of time. You will more and more grow and develop consciousness. More and more understand about yourself and about the world around you. That is the reality with a capital R. Ignorant means to look at yourself based on what we mentioned many times before, based on your nationality, your culture, your family name, your education, your job or your parents' job. That is how most ignorant people have an image of themselves, which on the surface is correct, but it is not your real self. It's not the reality with a capital R. That is somewhere deep inside you, and you will discover that more and more. And that is where yoga comes in. That is really what yoga is all about, actually. On all levels. Sutra 4. Avidya is the source of those that are mentioned after it, whether they are in the dormant, attenuated, alternating, or expanded condition. That sounds like a riddle, eh? Ignorance is avidya. Avidya means ignorance. Avidya is the opposite of vidya. Vidya is wisdom. Avidya is the source of those that are mentioned after it. Look at my hand. Those that are mentioned after it. Out of ignorance, all the other kleshas follow. Remember, this is about the kleshas, this is about misery. So all your misery sprouts from the first one, ignorance. Regardless of whether they are dormant, attenuated, alternated, or expanded. Now, what does that mean? Before lunch, I told you that you will develop a consciousness and sensitivity that will allow you to see misery from miles away. Remember? Giving you the power, if you're smart, to nip it in the bud, to avoid it. That is the dormant state. The dormant state is, there is the seed for conflict, there is a seed for misery visiting you. You don't know it yet. Most people know that something is wrong when it is too late. That is the expanded condition, where you have a full-blown conflict, where you have a full-blown situation that is irreversible. When it is in the dormant state, it hasn't even started yet, it hasn't even manifested yet. Can you see that everything exists out of those stages? It starts with a seed. The seed is fed and starts to evolve, grow. Then you have an attenuated situation. It then continues to grow. Then you have an alternating situation. And eventually, you have a full-blown situation that is irreversible. You have an expanded situation. The choice of words is a little bit complicated. It makes it a little bit hard to understand without a proper interpretation of what this means. But in practice, it is how everything starts and eventually ends. For normal people, only the last condition exists. That is irreversible, and it's a fait accompli. How do you say that in English? Fait accompli? Huh? Yeah, you understand what that means, fait accompli? It's done, it's finished, it happened, and you can't do anything about it anymore. Fait accompli, completed fact, literally. A common expression in French, apparently also in English. Ignorant people do not see the stages before. They only see the final stage when it is too late. And that is the very reason why we are suffering. It's the very reason why on a daily basis we find ourselves in a situation where we don't want to be, but we feel helpless. No more helplessness, because little by little you start to see. Before the full-blown stage, before the fait accompli, you start to see where it originates, allowing you to interfere and avoid it. We will come back to that, because Patanjali very directly addresses that issue later on. Yeah, I should not forget a very important aspect of this. There's this story about Jesus Christ. And you know that religious people, not only Christians but also Buddhists, they always say that you must forgive your enemies. And modern day psychologists and well-being therapists, they always say, forgive. Because if you can't forgive, you poison yourself. Well, how do you do that? How do you forgive somebody for hurting you or damaging you? How do you do that? In the same way that Jesus Christ forgave the people that killed him. He said, Lord, please forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. He reduced their violence and their intention to kill him to ignorance. How do you forgive people for hurting you, harming you? Start with yourself. He who is free from sin cast the first stone. We're all human. We're all ignorant. We all make mistakes. Now you are in a privileged situation because you solve your ignorance. You start becoming aware. And there is a danger when that happens. Because now you start to see other people's imperfections, while seeing that you yourself have solved some of your imperfections. You become a perfectionist. And you become intolerant of other people's imperfection. Then you have to go back to yourself and realize that you're only human, as are those people that you are intolerant of. Use your heart, use compassion. No? Let me give you an example. When I came to Korea in 1997, Korea was a very different country than it is now. Korea is very dynamic, but it went through several decades of very, very fast growth. And this growth was the reason, this growth was made possible by people being busy 25 hours a day, 8 days a week. Too busy. Too stressed. So you take a subway, which is always busy, and you see a seat, and you want to sit there and bang! Harmony pushes you with her elbow out of the way and she sits down. You recognize it? So what happens? You explode in anger. What the hell is this? How do you deal with that? You deal with that by trying to understand where that elbow comes from. How can somebody be so rude? You know how? There was a war in Korea, 1950-53, that devastated the whole country, all the way from Busan all the way to the 38th parallel. There was no tree left anymore. Nothing, no food. United Nations came with trucks, with rice, milk powder, and it was distributed. And your grandma or your great-grandma was standing in line with 6, 7, 8 children at home. She needed to have flour, rice, sugar, whatever she could get. There were too many people, too little food. So what do? You push people out of the way to get some. You don't want to come home with nothing. There are other people waiting who are hungry, dying from hunger. And that harmony you meet in the subway. She's not hungry anymore, but that's her fritti. She sees a situation that is the same as in 1953, 54, after the war, when everybody was hungry and she needed to get some food from the United Nations truck. The truck is gone, the war is gone, the famine is gone. That fritti is still 50, 60 years later, still in her memory, being triggered in that busy subway where she sees not a bag of rice, an empty seat. And when you understand that, you can only feel love, compassion, empathy. When you understand where that elbow comes from, you gladly give up your seat. You understand? Only yogi can do that. Because you have the ability to trace it back. And you do this for yourself, not for the harmony. Of course, also for the harmony. But you do this for yourself. You get a heart attack if you don't. It ruins your day if you don't. And most people can't, because they don't see the law of cause and effect. They can't, because there is no energy, no power of contemplation, of deduction, bringing something back to its origin, which is one of the next sutras. It's interesting, huh? I'm using an extreme example. Jesus Christ hanging on the cross is an extreme example. How do you forgive? By trying to understand the ignorance of the perpetrator. Now I know there are situations where you think, yeah, hey, how can you justify ignorance as a basis for killing a child, murdering a child, or raping a child? There is no justification for that. And those people should be punished. They're still human. And there is a reason why this kind of violence happens. But we're not going to go in a discussion about that, but that is a point where you could get a conflict, of course. That is a point where you also could argue with me like, hey, what the hell are you telling me now? This is nonsense. Because nothing is static and nothing is simple. It's simple to talk about. We need to simplify it to talk about so that you understand. But in real life, it can be very complicated. And that is a personal consideration that everybody has to make for themselves. But for extreme situations, we have a system to lock people up. Sometimes for the rest of their lives in an extreme situation. But in a humane system, even those people are being cared for with therapies and what have you, treatment. Sutra 5. Avidya is taking the non-eternal for the eternal, the impure for the pure, evil for good, and Atman, non-Atman for Atman respectively. Avidya is ignorance. which is the cause for human beings to have very limited sight. So we take the non-eternal for eternal. As a child, when you grow up in the house where you were born, you cannot imagine that 20 years ago or 50 years ago, that house where you are now living didn't even exist. And you cannot imagine that there comes a day that that house doesn't exist anymore. More practical example is that we take everything for granted. You go home, you're thirsty, you turn open the tap, and you drink water. You want to take a shower, you turn open the other tap and you have hot water. And you never think about the idea that there was a time you had to actually walk down the river with a bucket and get water. Worse, you take all that luxury for granted. You don't realize that if something goes wrong in the organization of our society, there's no water coming from the tap anymore. No electricity anymore from the sockets in the wall. No protection anymore, possibly. Chaos, anarchy could happen. We don't realize that. We take for granted everything that we are enjoying on a daily basis. The food in the supermarket, the air conditioner in the summer, the heater in the winter. We flick a switch and we don't think. There was a time this didn't exist and people were struggling to have food on the table every day, all year round. People were struggling with 20 degrees below zero, having to work outside on the farm. And when coming home to a house, still cold, no windows, covered with a piece of cloth. That is taking the non-eternal for eternal. The impure for the pure, taking the impure for the pure. How do you explain that? Finding all kinds of excuses to justify the unjustifiable. That is impure. Because an excuse is an attempt to purify something that is not pure. Laziness. Not fulfilling responsibilities, duties. Justifying incorrect behavior by trying to twist it and make it sound like it is correct. Trump. For us as yoga teachers, the best thing that could happen is to have a president like Trump, because almost everything you can apply to him. I'm just kidding. Maybe you like Trump. No, he has some good things too, but generally, my God. Taking the impure for pure. And the people around him. Originally, people governing, their goal should be the well-being of the people they govern. Right? What do you see? all they care about is themselves and their next election. And they twist and turn in the most ugly bends, curves, to justify the unjustifiable just because they want to have that seat of government when the next election comes around. And there are only few people, and that is the shocking part, there are only few people that stand up, straighten their back and say, hey, this is not good, this is wrong. Now, fortunately, what you see happening now is that more and more people straighten their backs. They lied before, they justified the impure for pure for a long time, but things have gone so far that many of those people turn around and say, I cannot do this anymore in good conscience. I cannot justify this anymore as being pure. But they did for a long time. According to this sutra, it's human behavior based on lower instincts, ignorance, based on ignorance. But from people in government, you expect more. I actually am in favor of a new law, not only in the States, but everywhere around the world, that does not allow people to run for election who simply have no qualifications. There should be some basic qualifications, like knowledge of history, knowledge of government, and what have you. Anyway, that's another story. Maybe that's one of the good things that will come out of this. All the mayhem, upheaval. Taking the evil for good. Well, you know, Hitler was admired by many people before the war and even during the war. And like with Trump, there were many people surrounding him who justified the impure for pure. Creating room for tremendous evil to be committed, evil acts, killing people on an industrialized scale, which we now do with animals, by the way, if you think of the meat industry. There are many examples. Evil people like Gaddafi from Libya, very cruel, but admired by many people, Libyan people. And what's his name? From Iraq. Yes, Saddam Hussein, thank you. If you read what this guy did in terms of torturing people and horrible things also, and yet admired by many, that is taking evil for good. Based on ignorance, we blind ourselves. Even when the evil is obvious, there is a mechanism in ignorant people that simply ignores the reality. And even deliberately comes up with justifications to justify the evil and to to underline the good that this person is doing. The final one is to take Atman, to take non-Atman for Atman. Atman, that is the self with the capital S. That is your true self, your true characteristics. There's a stupid example of James Bond in the handout, in the text. But yeah, if I sit here and I say, I keep emphasizing that I'm Dutch, very seriously, I'm Dutch and I'm a yogi, and what have you? Identifications with superficial things, and constantly saying, I am that, and I am that, and I am that. Is that really me? No. It's just labels. But in our ignorance, not being capable of seeing our true self, that is what we identify with. We identify with our job, with our family name, with our nationality and our culture, as I have done in the past. As a result of increasing consciousness and study of yoga that gives you all the guidelines of how to deal with that subconscious functioning, with that ignorance, you throw away all those identifications. I must have said at least once, but probably a couple of times in this course alone, I'm not a yogi. I just happen to have an insight in the science of yoga that I want to share. But yogi or yoga, that's just a word, it's just a label. Well, what does it mean? There are many people who call themselves yogi or yoga or whatever. And in the meantime, they break all the yamas and the niyamas. They're violent in their actions and reactions. They lie, they steal, they're showing unchaste behavior, promiscuous behavior. They're not in control of their desires and what have you. So what is the value of the word yoga or yogi? It's only deluding people. But I smiled because yoga is the science that is supposed to give you the knowledge and the insight to be aware of that. And then there are many, in total contradiction with what yoga represents, who call themselves a yogi without actually portraying the qualities that represents. It's an empty shell. It's a box without content. Can you see that? That's why I can never point at my chest and say I'm a yogi, because I know how imperfect I am. And I share that with you. Every class again. I'm not portraying myself as a yogi. I'm portraying myself as a human being who happens to know something about yoga. Can you see that? Remember, somewhere at the beginning, I told you that before I discovered yoga, I asked myself an essential question. I was unhappy in a dark place, And I was sick and tired of it. And I asked myself, if not this, then what do I want? And the answer was very simple and refreshing. The answer was, I just want to be happy. I didn't want to have an expensive car or a good job with a good salary. Just wanted to be happy. So the next question was, how do you do that? How do you get back your innocence, your happiness? The answer to that was also very simple. Just be yourself. Just be yourself. Don't be Dutch, don't be Hapkido, don't be Yogi, don't be family name. Whatever it is that you identify with. These are all kinds of identifications that have disconnected you from your real self, your Atman, and have led to all the misery and conflict that you are experiencing every day, on a daily basis, with yourself internally and your surroundings externally. And ever since then, that is what I've been pursuing. Making mistakes along the way, but growing as a result. Learning as a result. And getting closer and closer to the core of self, of Atman. Questions? Have a headache now, huh? Maybe you wish you never started this course. Opening up a can of worms. Yes, Neda?
My question is that, so in the sutra which you just mentioned, it's talking about pure and impure, or evil and non-evil,
Yeah.
and eternal, non-eternal. And then in the end, it talks about the non-duality. So we are studying the different aspects to understand how they work, and then see how they are all part of one. Because it wrote how when we say this is good or bad, then it's going back to duality. So what I want to know is how, or if there's only non-duality, then why are we separating everything?
We separate things because of our ignorance of the reality. The reality is everything is one.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all from the same source.
Okay.
But that is where the word disconnect comes from. There's a huge disconnect all over the world. But you little by little become more connected naturally as a result of what you're doing here. Because of your yoga practice, energy rises up, opens up consciousness. The first thing you investigate is yourself. That is where soul connection occurs. Connection with your heart's content. But it's a process. And processes take time. And when you're young, you're always impatient. And you achieve a milestone and you think all the work is done. You can sit on your laurels. When you get older, you realize it's a process that never ends. It's a work of a lifetime. And then some. If you believe in reincarnation, it will simply continue in your next life. It will never end.
question.
Yes?
I'm a little confused by a drill sergeant example. So my understanding of this progress is that they're kind of each klesha is like grosser than the ones that go before them. So like unpicking them backwards is a process of becoming more and more subtle or refined. Is that correct?
You can see it in that way, but I think that's a bit superficial to try to classify it in that way.
It is a causal sequence here, right?
Yes.
So, how does increasing the cause of fear overcome fear in your drill sergeant example?
No, you don't increase the cause of fear. You counter fear with anger.
Which is the cause of fear according to that sequence?
Yeah. Good question. When you have from ignorance ended up in anger or hatred, what do you want? You want that hatred to disappear. So you look for a situation in which you can be stable and comfortable and secure, which you don't want to lose anymore. So fear. So fear is a very deep instinct. It's very difficult to rationalize. But it is caused by in the first instance, it starts with ignorance, because as long as we don't realize fear, fear controls us. When you realize fear, at least you have an advantage, but even then it is very difficult to deal with fear. Just look at your own life. There are simply things. There are things that you approach very consciously, and still you find yourself incapable of making that step. So, we'll talk about this later, but what really helped me to realize my fear was the process that I went through before my first bungee jump. The people that I was with, when I suggested to do a bungee jump, they just outright rejected it. Oh, I'm not interested. They played very cool. They didn't show that they had any fear, scared of doing it. No, not interested. Too expensive. I know it was fear. It is scary. Jumping down like 30, 40 meters with just a elastic cord around your ankles. It took me, maybe my perception of time is a little bit distorted, but I have a feeling it took me at least 2 hours to convince myself that it's safe and I can do it. When I'd done it, I wanted to do it again, because I knew the second time I would experience it much different than the first time. But I had no money. It was very expensive, and I was young and didn't have so much money, so I couldn't do it a second time. A bungee jumping or jumping from an airplane with a parachute, that really helps you to realize your fear. And that experience in itself helps you later on with real life situations that we normally just leave it alone just because we can't overcome fear. That experience, doing something very scary that you chose to do in a very conscious way, going through the steps that bring you to the point that you're actually able to do it, that will help you enormously later on in daily life situations. I kind of was my own bully sergeant at that time. I thought trying to convince myself, I thought if I don't do it now, I will regret it. I will feel stupid. I will feel inferior. I will feel weak. Because rationally, I know the chance to die is very small. It's calculated. It's scientifically developed. The cord on which you are dangling. Actually, the same story was for me to leave everything behind in Holland and come to Korea. I had to really get angry at myself. If I don't do it now, I will regret for the rest of my life. That was the final push that I needed to just start putting things into motion. To really start seriously working towards quitting my job, locking the door, packing my suitcase and get on the plane. I didn't try to humiliate myself or anything, but I needed a kick in the butt.
I see that it does work, I just don't understand how it works.
Yeah, it's complex. It's because human nature is very complex. Human psychology is very complex.
It's a little bit perverse, really, isn't it?
Yeah, that means that you understand how it works. So that's it. It becomes a play.
Yeah.
You play with your fears. It's very serious business, but you approach it in a playful way. Because the moment that you take it serious, you block. You get stuck. So play and allow yourself to be afraid. There are many people who will never admit that they are afraid, but their behavior very clearly shows that they are. As long as you deny it, you will not be able to transform it. Play, just play. And if today is not the right day, let it go. Maybe you can try again tomorrow. You know what happens in that process? You become friends with the thing that you fear, because every day you play with it in your mind. And one day you are familiar with it, and the logical next step is to actually engage.
So,
Yes?
following on that and talking about the calculated risk, how do you know between an unreasonable fear and something that I don't do because I just think it's unwise but could be considered fear? For example, like the bungee jump, the numbers are on your side, you're going to survive it. But I kind of have, like, for example, I have a thing against small planes and helicopters.
Yeah.
I just don't feel like they're wise. I mean, they're not really designed according to my research. They're just, it's not a good option, and I just feel like it's a risk, a calculated risk I don't want to take. Now, is that fear or wisdom to stay off of a helicopter? Because there is a fear there, because I do want to live.
No, I think it's the same as with the bungee jump. I mean, what is the essential need for a bungee jump? It's not. There is no essential need. So why would you do something stupid like that? Just for the heck of it. Small plane or a helicopter? I agree with your kind of idea that it's a little bit stupid to get in such a small thing and go up in the air. But I find that idea very challenging, kind of exciting.
Is that fear or
Yes.
wisdom to stay off of it?
You know, every time I get into an airplane, big airplane, I'm scared.
I mean, there's some
No,
fears.
let me finish.
Okay.
Once you're in the air, the plane is stable. But when the plane accelerates and starts to take off, and especially when it goes down, and there is turbulence and wind, and the plane goes like, man, that is scary. You know what I do? I just imagine being in a roller coaster. I just see it as a little child enjoying a ride. Because also there, the statistics show that the chance to die in an airplane crash is much smaller than to die crossing the street. And yet every day people cross the street without thinking anything of it. And I never researched small planes in helicopters. How high is the crash rate?
Higher than the big planes.
Also, you have to research where they get their data from and is that data reliable?
Okay, so I guess what I'm getting at is, are all fears necessarily stemming from ignorance, or some fears a healthy fear and it's not as detrimental?
All
to your
fears
psyche?
are healthy. It is a natural instinct of survival. But in many cases, our fear keeps us from doing things that are essential in our evolution, in our growth, in our development. And stupid things like bungee jump can help us to realize our fear. And in daily life, in practical situations, essential situations, help us to deal with that fear. But if you're not ready, if you can't overcome that fear, don't do it. Don't feel pressured. Don't let anybody pressure you. But fear is simply a signal. It's a red light flashing, telling you, danger, pay attention, watch out. But that fear is so deeply ingrained in us that that red light starts flashing in situations where it's not warranted. That is the condition that most people are in. We try to expand our potential by learning to understand fear. Take it for what it is. It's a signal. A signal that we then use our intellect to rationalize. Is it warranted? Okay, then I will stay away from it. But wait a minute, there are so many elements here that actually, if I think about this rationally, there is no reason to be afraid. But every time I get in a plane, that deep instinct is triggered in me. I have very consciously, in the past I would not even admit that I'm scared of flying. Because it's not a phobia, or how do you call it?
Phobia.
I can fly. You don't have to drag me into the plane or anything. It's kind of, I feel the energy whirl in my belly, and I'm pretty sure everybody does. Most people are not conscious of it. And we'll just say, oh no, why? I'm not scared. But I undergo these kind of things very consciously. And I have no trouble admitting that I'm scared. It's a play. We are not designed to go up 10 kilometers up in the air. Why do we do that? Yes? Neda?
I feel like that overcoming fear is like having we do rationalize it, but then that rationality, like looking at the numbers, or it gives us this faith or belief in ourselves and in that situation that it will work out how it's supposed to work out.
No, it's not that simple. You are fighting a real battle there. No matter your power of rationality, that fear is super strong. The bungee jump example, I had rationalized it, and yet it took me so long to actually get there and buy a ticket.
Yeah.
And going up there and then standing at the edge of the platform and having to make that move to actually jump, That was very, very scary, in spite of all my power of reasoning and rationalizing.
Yeah.
So it doesn't disappear. But it's very interesting that you can come to the point that you can overrule it.
So it's like when you jump, you just, it's like taking the leap of faith, like it will be okay and you jump. Or no. Like at the very, very end. Is it? That's how I feel.
I think the moment that I jumped,
okay, I just have to do it.
the moment that I had to jump, I didn't hesitate. I didn't want to end up there, standing there like with an instructor behind you that tells you, okay, jump, and you're like, oh no. No, I just jumped. But I just thought something like, nothing will happen. And if it does, then okay.
Yeah.
But the chance that something will happen is so small. If it does, then okay.
Just what?
So I just jumped.
Okay.
I really want again. Yeah, because once you overcome the fear, you can enjoy it.
Do you have to do training? This is not related to fear, but do you have to do training to actually jump alone?
Not at all. You have to buy a ticket and go up there. If you don't jump, the instructor kicks you in the butt. No, they don't.
Your turn.
No, but war
Yes.
is 100,000 times more scary
Yes.
than a bungee jump. A bully sergeant's job is very, very important. We look at war in a very superficial way, but you know, firecracker, if it explodes close by, is scary. But what do you think about a 500-pound bomb? Or you know, big explosives? You can't imagine how terrifying, how terrorizing the battlefield is. And if you're not trained, you will dig a hole and never come out of it anymore, or run away as fast as you can. And that's not what soldiers do. They stick together, they move forward, but they are doing something much, much more difficult than me controlling my fear of doing a bungee jump. It's so much more terrifying. But it is, for a country, it's necessary to have an army that can win wars. Coming to another point, many people think, you know, we can live without armies and without wars. That's not human nature. If you have a strong army, you're safe. If you have a weak army, you're never safe. We're unfortunately in a situation that we need an army. Europe, the power of Europe, NATO, is that many small countries and peoples stick together with the same aim. That is why there has been no conflict in that area, except the Balkans. But Balkans were not part of NATO at that time. There has been no conflict. Because everybody swallows their pride and keeps in mind the same goal. But human nature is always looking for conflict. Men, especially men. And that's the reality that we live in. Let's have a short break.